Chapter-1 of The Secret Power. A cloud floated slowly above the mountain peak. Vast, fleecy and white as the crested foam of a sea wave, it sailed through the sky with a divine air of majesty, seeming almost to express a consciousness of its own grandeur. Over a spacious tract of southern California it extended its snowy canopy, moving from the distant Pacific Ocean across the heights of the Sierra Madre, now and then catching fire at its extreme edge from the sinking sun, which burned like a red brand flung on the roof of a roughly built hut situated on the side of a sloping hollow in one of the smaller hills. The door of the hut stood open. There were a couple of benches on the burnt grass outside, one serving as a table, the other as a chair. Papers and books were neatly piled on the table, and on the chair, if chair it might be called, a man sat reading. His appearance was not prepossessing at first glance, though his actual features could hardly be seen, so concealed were they by a heavy growth of beard. In the way of clothing he had little to trouble him. Loose woolen trousers, a white shirt, a leathern belt to keep the two garments in place, formed his complete outfit, finished off by wide canvas shoes. A thatch of dark hair, thick and ill-combed, apparently served all his need of head covering, and he seemed unconscious of, or else indifferent to, the hot glare of the summer sky, which was hardly tempered by the long shadow of the floating cloud. At some moments he was absorbed in reading, at others in writing. Close within his reach was a small notebook, in which from time to time he jotted down certain numerals and made rapid calculations, frowning impatiently as though the very act of writing was too slow for the speed of his thought. There was a wonderful silence everywhere, a silence such as can hardly be comprehended by anyone who has never visited wide-spreading country, over-canopied by large stretches of open sky, and barricaded from the further world by mountain ranges, which are like huge walls built by a race of Titans. The dwellers in such regions are few. There is no traffic save the coming and going of occasional pack mules across the hill tracks, no sign of modern civilization. Among such deep and solemn solitudes, the sight of a living human being is strange and incongruous. Yet the man seated outside his hut had an air of ease and satisfied proprietorship, not always found with wealthy owners of mansions and parklands. He was so thoroughly engrossed in his books and papers that he hardly saw, and certainly did not hear, the approach of a woman who came climbing wearily up the edge of the sloping hill, against which his cabin presented itself to the view as a sort of fitment, and advanced towards him carrying a tin pail full of milk. This she set down within a yard or so of him, and then, straightening her back, she rested her hands on her hips and drew a long breath. For a minute or two he took no notice of her. She waited. She was a big, handsome creature, sun-browned and black-haired, with flashing dark eyes lit by a spark that was not originally caught from heaven. Presently, becoming conscious of her presence, he threw his book aside and looked up. "Well, so you've come after all. Yesterday you said you wouldn't." She shrugged her shoulders. "I do not wish you to starve." "Very kind of you, but nothing can starve me." "If you had no food." "I should find some," he said. "Yes, I should find some, somewhere. I want very little." He rose, stretching his arms lazily above his head. Then, stooping, he lifted the pail of milk and carried it into his cabin. Disappearing for a moment, he returned, bringing back the pail empty. "I have enough for 2 days now," he said, "and longer. What you brought me at the beginning of the week has turned beautifully sour, a lovely curd, as our cook at home used to say, and with that lovely curd and plenty of fruit I am living in luxury." Here he felt in his pockets and took out a handful of coins. "That's right, isn't it?" She counted them over as he gave them to her, bit one with her strong white teeth, and nodded. "You don't pay me," she said emphatically. "It's the plaza you pay." "How many times will you remind me of that?" he replied with a laugh. "Of course I know I don't pay you. Of course I know I pay the plaza, that amazing hotel and sanatorium with a tropical garden and no comfort. "It is more comfortable than this," she said, with a disparaging glance at his log dwelling. "How do you know?" And he laughed again. "What have you ever experienced in the line of hotels? You are employed at the Plaza to fetch and carry, to wait on the wretched invalids who come to California for a cure of diseases incurable." "You are not an invalid," she said, with a slight accent of contempt. "No, I only pretend to be." "Why do you pretend?" "Oh, Manella, what a question! Why do we all pretend? All! Every human being from the child to the dotard. Simply because we dare not face the truth. For example, consider the sun. It's a furnace with flames 5,000 miles high, but we pretend it is our beautiful orb of day. We must pretend. If we didn't, we should go mad." Manella knitted her black brows perplexedly. "I do not understand you," she said. "Why do you talk nonsense about the sun? I suppose you are ill after all. You have an illness of the head." He nodded with mock solemnity. "That's it. You're a wise woman, Manella. That's why I'm here. Not tubercles on the lungs. Tubercles on the brain. Oh, those tubercles! They could never stand the Plaza. The gaiety, the brilliancy, the all too dazzling social round." He paused, and a gleam of even white teeth under his dark moustache gave the suggestion of a smile. "That's why I stay up here." "You make fun of the Plaza," said Manella, biting her lips vexedly. "And of me too. I am nothing to you." "Absolutely nothing, dear. But why should you be anything?" A warm flush turned her sunburnt skin to a deeper tinge. "Men are often fond of women," she said. "Often? Oh, more than often. Too often. But what does that matter?" She twisted the ends of her rose-coloured neckerchief nervously with one hand. "You are a man," she replied curtly. "You should have a woman." He laughed, a deep, mellow, hearty laugh of pleasure. "Should I? You really think so? Wonderful, Manella! Come here. Come quite close to me." She obeyed, moving with the soft tread of a forest animal, and face to face with him looked up. He smiled kindly into her dark, fierce eyes, and noted with artistic approval the unspoiled beauty of natural lines in her form, and the proud poise of her handsome head on her full throat and splendid shoulders. "You are very good looking, Manella," he then remarked, lazily. "Quite the model for a Juno. Be satisfied with yourself. You should have scores of lovers." She stamped her foot suddenly and impatiently. "I have none," she said, "and you know it. But you do not care." He shook a reproachful forefinger at her. "Manella, Manella, you are naughty. Temper, temper. Of course I do not care. Be reasonable. Why should I?" She pressed both hands tightly against her bosom, seeking to control her quick, excited breathing. "Why should you? I do not know. But I care. I would be your woman. I would be your slave. I would wait upon you and serve you faithfully. I would obey your every wish. I am a good servant. I can cook and sew and wash and sweep. I can do everything in a house, and you should have no trouble. You should write and read all day. I would not speak a word to disturb you. I would guard you like a dog that loves his master." He listened, with a strange look in his eyes, a look of wonder and something of compassion. There was a pause. The silence of the hills was, or seemed, more intense and impressive. The great white cloud still spread itself in large leisure among the miles of slowly darkening sky. Presently he spoke. "And what wages, Manella? What wages would I have to pay for such a servant? Such a dog?" Her head drooped. She avoided his steady, searching gaze. "What wages, Manella? None, you would say, except love. You tell me that you would be my woman, and I know you mean it. You would be my slave. You mean that too. But you would want me to love you. Manella, there is no such thing as love. Not in this world. There is animal attraction. The magnetism of the male for the female for the male. The magnetism that pulls the opposite sexes together in order to keep this planet supplied with an ever new crop of fools. But love? No, Manella. There is no such thing." Here he gently took her 2 hands away from their tightly folded position on her bosom, and held them in his own. "No such thing, my dear," he went on, speaking softly and soothingly as though to a child, "except in the dreams of poets, and you, fortunately, know nothing about poetry. The wild animal in you is attracted to the tame, ruminating animal in me, and you would be my woman though I would not be your man. I quite believe that it is the natural instinct of the female to select her mate, but though the rule may hold good in the forest world, it doesn't always work among the human herd. Man considers that he has the right of selection, quite a mistake of his, I'm sure, for he has no real sense of beauty or fitness, and generally selects most vilely. All the same, he is an obstinate brute, and sticks to his brutish ideas as a snail sticks to its shell. I am an obstinate brute. I am absolutely convinced that I have the right to choose my own woman, if I want one, which I don't, or if I ever do want one, which I never shall." She drew her hands quickly from his grasp. There were tears in her splendid dark eyes. "You talk, she said with a kind of sob in her voice. "It's all talk with you, talk which I cannot understand. I don't want to understand. I am only a poor ignorant girl. I cannot talk, but I can love. Ah, yes, I can love. You say there is no such thing as love. What is it then? When one prays every night and morning for a man, when one would work one's fingers to the bone for him, when one would die to keep him from sickness and harm, what do you call it?" He smiled. "Self-delusion, Manella. The beautiful self-delusion of every nature-bred woman when her fancy is attracted by a particular sort of man. She makes an ideal of him in her mind and imagines him to be a god, when he is nothing but a devil." Something sinister and cruel in his look startled her. She made the sign of the cross on her bosom. "A devil?" she murmured. "A devil?" "Ah, now you are frightened," he said with a flash of amusement in his eyes. "You are a good Catholic and you believe in devils. So you make the sign of the cross as a protection. That's right. That's the way to defend yourself from my evil influence. Wise Manella." The light mockery of his tone roused her pride, that pride which had been suppressed in her by the force of a passionate emotion she could not restrain. She lifted her head and regarded him with an air of sorrow and scorn. "After all, I think you must be a wicked man," she said. "You have no heart. You are not worthy to be loved." "Quite true, Manella. You have hit the bull's eye in the very middle 3 times. I am a wicked man. I have no heart. I am not worthy to be loved. No, I am not. I should find it a bore." "Bore?" she echoed. "What is that?" "What is that? It is itself, Manella. Bore is just bore. It means tiredness, worn-outness, a state in which you wish yourself in a hot bath or a cold one, so that nobody can come near you. To be loved would finish me off in a month." Her big eyes opened more widely than their wont in piteous perplexity. "But how?" she asked. "How? Why, just as you have put it. To be prayed for night and morning, to be worked for and waited on till fingers turned to bones, to be guarded from sickness and harm. Heavens! Think of it! No more adventures in life, no more freedom. Just love, 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 which would not be love at all, but the chains of a miserable wretch in prison." She flushed an angry crimson. "Who is it that would chain you?" she demanded. "Not I. You could do as you liked with me, you know it, and when you go away from this place, you could leave me and forget me. I should never trouble you or remind you that I lived. I should have had my happiness, enough for my day." The pathos in her voice moved him, though he was not easily moved. On a sudden impulse he put an arm about her, drew her to him and kissed her. She trembled at his caress, while he smiled at her emotion. "A kiss is nothing, Manella," he said. "We kiss children as I kiss you. You are a child woman. Physically you are a Juno, mentally you are an infant. By and by you will grow up, and you will be glad I did no more than kiss you. It's getting late. You must go home." He released her and put her gently away from him. Then, as he saw her eyes still uplifted questioningly to his face, he laughed. "Upon my word!" he exclaimed. "I'm making a nice fool of myself. Actually wasting time on a woman. Go home, Manella, go home. If you are wise you won't stop here another minute. See now, you are full of curiosity. All women are. You want to know why I stay up here in this hill cabin by myself instead of staying at the Plaza. You think I'm a rich Englishman. I'm not. No Englishman is ever rich, not up to his own desires. He wants the earth and all that therein is, does the Englishman, and of course he can't have it. He rather grudges America her large slice of rich plum pudding territory, forgetting that he could have had it himself for the price of tea. But I don't grudge anybody anything. America is welcome to the whole bulk as far as I'm concerned. Britain ditto. Let them both eat and be filled. All I want is to be left alone. Do you hear that, Manella? To be left alone. Particularly by women. That's one reason why I came here. This cabin is supposed to be a sort of tuberculosis shelter, where a patient in hopeless condition comes with a special nurse to die. I don't want a nurse, and I'm not going to die. Tubercles don't touch me. They don't flourish on my soil. So this solitude just suits me. If I were at the Plaza I should have to meet a lot of women. No, you wouldn't," interrupted Manella suddenly and sharply. "Only one woman." "Only one? You?" She sighed and moved impatiently. "Oh, no, not me. A stranger." He looked at her with a touch of inquisitiveness. "An invalid?" "She may be. I don't know. She has golden hair." He gave a gesture of dislike. "Dreadful! That's enough. I can imagine her. A die-away creature with a cough and a straw-coloured wig. Yes, that will do, Manella. You'd better go and wait upon her. I've got all I want for a couple of days at least." He seated himself and took up his notebook. She turned away. "Stop a minute, Manella." She obeyed. "Golden hair, you said?" She nodded. "Old or young?" She might be either. And Manella gazed dreamily at the darkening sky. "There is nobody old nowadays, or so it seems to me." "An invalid?" "I don't think so. She looks quite well. She arrived at the Plaza only yesterday." "Ah! Well, good night, Manella. And if you want to know anything more about me, I don't mind telling you this, that there's nothing in the world I so utterly detest as a woman with golden hair. There!" She looked at him, surprised at his harsh tone. He shook a forefinger at her. "Fact!" he said. "Fact as hard as nails. A woman with golden hair is a demon, a witch, a mischief and a curse. See? Always has been and always will be. Good night." But Manella paused meditatively. "She looks like a witch," she said slowly. "One of those creatures they put in pictures of fairy tales, small and white, very small. I could carry her." "I wouldn't try it if I were you," he answered with visible impatience. "Off you go. Good night." She gave him one lingering glance, then turning abruptly picked up her empty milk pail and started down the hill at a run. The man she left gave a sigh, deep and long, of intense relief. Evening had fallen rapidly, and the purple darkness enveloped him in its warm dense gloom. He sat absorbed in thought, his eyes turned towards the east, where the last stretches of the afternoon's great cloud trailed filmy threads of woolly black through space. His figure seemed gradually drawn within the coming night, so as almost to become a part of it, and the stillness around him had a touch of awe in its impalpable heaviness. One would have thought that in a place of such utter loneliness The natural human spirit of a man would instinctively desire movement, action of some sort, to shake off the insidious depression which crept through the air like a creeping shadow. But the solitary being, seated somewhat like an Aryan idol, hands on knees and face bent forwards, had no inclination to stir. His brain was busy, and half unconsciously his thoughts spoke aloud in words. "Have we come to the former old stopping place?" he said, as though questioning some invisible companion. "Must we cry halt for the 1,000,000,000th time? Or can we go on? Dare we go on? If actually we discover the secret, wrapped up like the minutest speck of a kernel in the nut of an electron, what then? Will it be well or ill? Shall we find it worth while to live on here with nothing to do, nothing to trouble us or compel us to labour? Without pain shall we be conscious of health? Without sorrow shall we understand joy?" A sudden whiteness flooded the dark landscape, and a full moon leapt to the edge of the receding cloud. Its rising had been veiled in the drift of black woolly vapour, and its silver glare, sweeping through the darkness, flashed over the land with astonishing abruptness. The man lifted his eyes. "One would think that done for effect," he said, half aloud. "If the moon were the goddess Cynthia, beloved of Endymion, as woman and goddess, in an impulse of vanity, she would certainly have done that for effect. As it is—" Here he paused. An instinctive feeling warned him that someone was looking at him, and he turned his head quickly. On the slope of the hill where Manella had lately stood, there was a figure, white as the white moonlight itself, outlined delicately against the dark background. It seemed to be poised on the earth like a bird just lightly descended. In the stirless air its garments appeared closed about it fold on fold, like the petals of an unopened magnolia flower. As he looked, it came gliding towards him with the floating ease of an air bubble, and the strong radiance of the large moon showed its woman's face, pale with the moonbeam pallor, and set in a wave of hair that swept back from the brows and fell in a loosely twisted coil, like a shining snake stealthily losing itself in folds of misty drapery. He rose to meet the advancing phantom. "Entirely for effect," he said. "Well planned and quite worthy of you. All for effect." End of Chapter 1.